I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. Today is Tuesday, October 24th, 2017. This is a joint meeting with the Information Technology and General Services Committee and Personnel and Animal Welfare Committees. Welcome. And welcome to my colleagues.
Thank you.
And Mr. Clerk, do we have any speaker cards for general public comment or multiple agenda items?
No, ma'am, we do not.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and close general public comment. And that'll take us to our first item on the agenda. Mr. Koretz, would you like to have any opening remarks? I apologize for rushing.
That would be great. So on this item, as a starting point to this discussion, I'd like to say that every city call center is not immune to operational issues. I know the sanitation call center was overloaded after the waste franchise was rolled out. I know the 311 center hours change, and sometimes the operators can't answer specific questions and sometimes transfer people multiple times before they reach the right destination. So it seems like we might need to look at revamping the way we provide customer service in general. But we obviously have a focus on this item on animal services. And so if we could ask the appropriate folks to come up from Animal Services to present this item and answer questions, that would be great.
Sure. Item 1 on the agenda is Information Technology Agency report relative to enhancing the telephone systems currently used by the Department of Animal Services to improve the ability of residents' ability to request service and the CAO to report relative to the Department of Animal Services staffing levels assigned to answer calls and log service requests and analysis of the current call load and wait times pursuant to motion. Koretz Rodriguez.
Oh, and for the record, I'm Paul Koretz, the chair of the PAW committee, and Mitch Englander is president, and we have a quorum of our committee. I don't know if you want to introduce your...
And I am joined with my colleagues from the Information Technology Committee, Mr. Blumenfeld and Mr. O'Farrell. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Koretz.
Welcome.
Good afternoon. Dana Brown from the Department of Animal Services. And today we are here in response to the motion regarding doing an evaluation of the technological aspect of our phone system. ITA has prepared a report to that end, and then also the CAO's office to do an evaluation of the staffing levels, the current staffing levels at the Department of Animal Services in terms of how we field phone calls and staff that does that, and appropriate changes that might be made to address some of the problems that we have been having.
So hello, I'm Jean Holm, the Assistant General Manager at the Information Technology Agency. So in response to the council motion, we filed a report. I'll just give you a quick summary. So what we did is we were working with Animal Services and the CAO to look at their telecommunications system, specifically in the area of answering calls. So we're able to give some specific measures around the number of calls, and then there's a few estimates, because a few things we don't actually have the data to see into some of the parts of the system. So we estimate that Animal Services gets about 30,000 calls a month from folks who need some kind of information or emergency services or other context. We also manage the 311 call center, which currently only sort of has spillover access for Animal Services calls. So if someone calls 311 directly and asks for an operator, they get to 311, and we can answer Animal Services calls. But traditionally, normally we route those folks directly to the animal shelters. So the way in which the calls are routed, just because this is part of the question, I think, that came out, was to look at the fact that when people call into the 800 number, then what happens is those calls get into a queue, and people can then, at the end of the queue, decide which of the animal shelters
Excuse me. Mr. Spindler, you're already here disrupting the meeting with animal noises. If you do that again, we will have to remove you, or if you engage in conversation with us from the back of the room. Please continue.
Sure. And so they come into a queue, and then you can put in your zip code to get to the animal shelter nearest you. The concern in our technical analysis is there's only 16 numbers that can be in that queue at any one time before you just get a busy signal. given the numbers of having 30,000 calls a month, I think it's pretty clear that there are times when people are going to just get a busy signal and not be able to get into the queue. Some of the animal shelters are run 24/7, others, so 2 of them are, and then the other ones are only available during sort of normal working hours. Those after-hours calls are routed to the other 2 shelters, so those after-hours shelters get larger numbers of calls in those times. In the report, we've given you some detailed analysis from the summer months that looks at the number of calls that go into each of the shelters if you're interested. And again, I just want to point out, these numbers are about 20,000 a month, but we estimate there's about another 10,000 calls a month. This is just an estimate that come in directly to the numbers at the shelters. So this is all through the integrated technology that we manage at ITA. So the concern becomes, one is we have a limitation on the number of calls that can come in and get put into the queue. We also have found that people can call directly into the shelter numbers and kind of jump to the queue. And so this means that sometimes you can get stuck in the queue for a very, very, very long time. And so what we wanted to do is give 2 recommendations that come out of this. Both of them have costs associated. We just put down the technology costs here, and I think CAO has really been asked to look at the personnel costs behind it. So one is that with the existing, so there are a couple of recommendations. One is that the current way in which people come in and have a chance to press different buttons to be able to get to the information they need, and a lot of people can just get information through the IVR system, that could be engineered a little bit cleaner so that people can more quickly and with less button pushes get to the information they need or to the shelter that they want. And also the 16 concurrent calls, I think you can all guess that is probably an insufficient number. And then we also need to make sure that people are logged into the call system so that when the call comes through to a shelter number, it will only come through if we know that there's an operator ready to take it or a person at the shelter ready to take that call. If they're not logged in, then there isn't an answer at the other end. So there's 2 potential technology improvements. One is to look at the existing system that they have, which is quite an old system, and we could potentially, with a relatively low cost, so about $3,600 per year, be able to put in an option that would ring first at one phone at the shelter and then at another phone at the shelter and another phone until, so it could ring at multiple places given that shelter personnel often move around the shelter, as you can imagine. And so it could potentially have a higher likelihood of reaching a shelter person. But it doesn't really kind of solve some of the problems. The other option is slightly more expensive. So the first year is about $39,000 and then about $32,000 a year after that. What it does is it uses the same system that many of the other call centers do and that 311 also uses. So this is a state-of-the-art system, Verizon Call Center, that allows us to put people in a queue. They understand how many people are ahead of them. It's an unlimited queue, so people would be able to know if they're going to be on hold for a long time. It also gives a callback option potentially. That's how we use it at 311, so that if somebody wants to be called back and not be just on hold, then you can get called back and you still hold your place in the queue. It still would require that animal services have people logged into the system and be available. So initially, just without sort of any other cost accommodation and wanting to be helpful to our friends and colleagues at Animal Services, and because I've adopted many shelter pets myself over the years, is the folks at the 311 call center did take off the option to forward calls to Animal Services. That was one of the options we had. That means that now, as of 2 weeks ago, we are actually answering an additional 2,000 or so, maybe as much as 3,000 calls a month, trying to take a little of the load off of Animal Services. It stretches our personnel at 311 and increases our hold times, but it seemed like in the sense of city service, it was at least a Band-Aid we could put in place.
Just to give you a little bit of information about how Animal Services currently staffs and fields phone calls. Several years ago, we had a call center that we've talked about in previous meetings where this was dedicated staff that only answered the phone calls that came in to Animal Services, and they were trained to field those calls and answer those calls as it relates to a variety of Animal Services type issues. As the city began to experience economic difficulties, our staffing dropped further and further until in 2010, we had to dismantle the call center, and we got the IVR system that is currently in place that allows us to just sort of allow people to go straight to the shelters. We don't have any specific dedicated staff that answers the telephone. The people who answer the phones are the people who process adoptions. So it is administrative clerks and senior admin clerks. There are about 25 admin clerks citywide and six seniors and admin clerks who also help with those phones. The situation at Animal Services has gotten so over the years through the beginning of the ACE program, as well as just sort of the success that we have experienced in our practices over the year. That is our animal welfare practices. People just feel a lot more comfortable calling us for advice and just, different things. And so our call loads have gone up tremendously, and we handle that in the shelter by having everybody answer the phones. We have phones that ring in the squad room for the officers, whoever is there. Even our medical staff answers calls if they're ringing. And so obviously, we need to do some reconfiguration of that, and 311 has been very, very helpful in just sort of discussing the technology that's available, as well as Jeannie mentioned, taking that serve to Animal Services off of their menu. So that's been helpful as well. We have done some other things in the interim to try to deal with the problems that we're having with the existing resources that we have. We make sure that we have no vacancies right now amongst our clerical staff that answers the phone. We have used the targeted local hire system and has a targeted local hire program, and we have filled all of our vacancies all the way up to September was the last time somebody came in. So we also are making sure that we have no log outs. Jeannie mentioned that the system that we have in place now requires that that the phones be logged in to receive phone calls from the IVR system, from the phone tree, and it's sort of a virtual thing. So when the calls log out, we don't know. We don't have, the way that we know is that people start to complain that they can't get through. So now we're being proactive about making sure that those calls are logged in by checking periodically to make sure that nothing has logged out on its own. And then also, we're continuing to work with 311 to try to see if we can sort of build their resources in a way that will allow them to take our non-emergency calls, then leaving the emergency calls to us. Additionally, in looking at the recommendations that 311 has placed in their report. So we believe that their assistance with our non-emergency calls during the day is definitely an added efficiency and better serves the public. But we do have to address our internal resources for answering the calls that ITA has to return back to us. Calls like the ones that come from our rescue community that have very, very specific questions about animals, medical questions, those sorts of things. Also, our urgent calls for service and the insistent caller that just wants to talk to somebody in the shelter. Those calls are going to have to come back to us, and we're going to have to be adequately staffed in order to field those calls quickly. Obviously, the current IVR system is antiquated and unable to provide the level of service that we require. So after having read ITA's recommendations, we believe that replacing the existing ACD with the full call center is the best option. But of course, we'll need to have dedicated staff to support such a system so that we'll have agents that are able to log on and able to be tasked with answering those calls, and that is what they will be tasked with doing, as opposed to all the other different things that our current practice allows for. And we're preparing a budget package that sort of works in conjunction with ITA's budget package as we've been working together. So we believe that a combination of both budget package will address the needs that we have.
So obviously, this became a high-profile issue with the LA Times article entitled "You Might As Well Be Calling to the Moon." In your opinion, are these problems just a phone system issue, or a staffing issue, or a combination? Where's most of the holdup happening now?
Well, I think that it's a combination. Certainly, the people who call and talk about dead airspace and being on hold for like long periods of time without anybody coming back to them, and then the call dropping. Those things are sort of more institutionalized into the system. As it relates to our staffing, we don't have dedicated staff to answer the phone, so that's certainly an issue. Even if we kept the current system that we have and we just staffed, made sure that we have people who only answer the phones, that would certainly address it in part. But I think that that our call service needs are much higher than they used to be at the time that we got this system, and we need to look at a different system.
And is what you're proposing, in addition to the technical changes, reinstating the Animal Services call center as it was in 2010?
No, no, it's not. It's sort of an offshoot of that because ITA will be handling the calls Monday through, 7 days a week from 7 to 7. And so we would be taking the calls that they can't answer, which often are calls that take longer because they want to have sort of a professional conversation about an animal and its habits and its behavior and that sort of thing, as well as the urgent calls for service and the night calls. So we'll they will be handled sort of out of each. If we use the existing sort of setup, not the existing system, but the existing setup in terms of where people work, because we don't have anywhere that a call center can be housed. The way that we had it before was prior to the Da Vinci fire, and we had a call center at admin, and now we don't have that space anymore.
So is there some place where such a call center could be located rather than in your own space, but with all Animal Services personnel that could actually answer all their questions?
So I was just going to say, I think the intent is to train 311 personnel. So we've already done initial training so that we could take on those 2,000 calls a month. And the idea is that our call center is able to accommodate. We're actually doing a hybrid test this year to be able to pilot a few work from anywhere 311 call operator options so that our call center doesn't have to get completely constrained into a space. And that eventually could be something we could share with Animal Services so that those calls that come into the VCC can actually get routed anywhere.
So we're trying to train people that don't have expertise in Animal Services to kind of barely get by with being able to answer enough, as opposed to actually having personnel that's informed?
So the training with the 301 personnel, and again, we handle 72 different kinds of service requests, so we're pretty savvy on a variety of areas at the city. And the more we answer, of course, the smarter we get. But the idea is that we would handle the more routine and general questions, and then the ones that really need to have very specific information get routed directly to the folks in Animal Services. So the thing is that at a call center, a lot of questions follow the same basic procedures, and we have a large knowledge base, and we've got a lot of contributions now from Animal Services. And so our operators are very used to walking through those, and whenever there's something outside of that scope, then we would refer it on.
So it just goes to any random shelter? How do you decide who gets it in the Animal Services grouping if you go ahead with this process?
Well, it would depend on whatever the call is. The caller, you will know what he or she is looking for. And so they, just like they would self-serve themselves to go to a particular shelter, if they would let 311 know what shelter they need to go to, if in fact they need to be transferred to a shelter. But I will say that also when we had the call center, these employees were sort of trained to answer our calls, sort of only. And as they sort of done that for a while, they became experts in fielding the kind of phone calls that come into animal services and knowing when, okay, I'm done with what I can help with, now it's time to transfer to an animal control officer. And the 311 operators will, I'm sure, on short order, be able to do the same thing.
Okay,
Do you want to open it up for any other questions from
yes,
colleagues?
please.
Mr. Alfaro?
I have a few. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, and thanks for the report. And I know this is important to you as well. It's a given. A couple of questions. Is there a current vacancy rate affecting the ability to answer calls adequately?
So we don't have a vacancy rate in clerical staff, which is the staff that it primarily answers the phone, and we recently fixed that. But there is a large vacancy rate in the officers. So whenever, like we have the overflow, there's not as many officers, in the squad room.
Right.
And we even, the ones that we have, obviously we try to keep them out on calls for service. So, lots of times there's nobody in the squad room because there's not enough of them to be able to sort of be in the office as well as, be in the field. So we're running with 18 vacancies in the animal control officer class, which is something that was placed upon us during the budget cycle. But we expect to have those restored in the 19 budget, and we are working with the personnel department even now to be able to fill those positions immediately when the funding is available.
So those vacancies are a factor in this incident, more or less.
Oh, absolutely, they are a factor, especially in the way that we operate now, which is everybody help.
Okay.
So yes.
That's a factor. And the other question, so you're advocating replacing the ACD with full call center, but you need more personnel.
Yes,
and
sir.
You talked about incorporating that into a budget request. Approximately how many personnel?
We are looking at 11, and we expect that to be at the admin clerk level. Then again, of course, being able to use the targeted local hire program once again for that, and then we would have 2 at each shelter, except for at the harbor where there will only be 1. They have fewer lines as well at the harbor.
And lastly, in the context of this conversation, would that put us at pre-Great Recession levels, or is this a whole new dynamic?
Actually, when we had the one call center, I believe there were only 8 or 9 who provided the 24-hour response. But now, so many years have passed, and we've done so many things that it hasn't probably. I don't have the numbers to speak to, what the call level is now and what it was in 2010. But I do know that we have so many more programs in place, so many more New Hope partners.
Right.
That our call volume has risen tremendously. And so this actually is more than we used to have.
The universe has changed a little bit.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, Joint Chairs. Thank you very much for the presentation, and I very much like the idea of moving to the call center. I think that makes a lot of sense to beef that up, where 311's doing a great job, and expanding the capabilities just broadens it for the whole city, so that's wonderful. While you were talking, I was Googling or clicking around the My 311 LA site to see how much gets offloaded onto the website, and a lot of the things I clicked on, the end result is call to shelter. Whether it was the animal cruelty, the dangerous animals, the find a cat or dog. You go through a couple screens, but by the end, it's a find. So I don't know how much of this, if you've looked at it, if some of the call volume could be decreased by beefing up the back end on the mobile app and on the website to have more reporting options and options that don't require a call-in.
Yes, so we are a part of the phase 2 of the My LA 311, and actually, I actually wrote this down and then didn't say it, and of course, I'm so happy you brought that up. We're so excited. We're working with ITA, even, I believe, even today, they are working with our subject matter experts to sort of find out what our needs are and how they can incorporate that into the app. Right now, we are looking at having things like barking dog complaints, some dangerous animal complaints, obviously licensing, and some other things that we are looking at having where you can do calls for service on the app without having to actually make a phone call. So, so far, the meetings that I have been involved in have been more overview meetings about, some of the things that we can do, and now they're drilling down into each area. And in fact, I'm sure today they are meeting with our field staff in order to talk about how they can sort of incorporate the kind of calls for service that we get into the app. So we definitely expect that to have a decrease in our calls.
That's obviously much more cost effective. I'd rather spend the money up front building that out and educating people and that also creates better consumer happiness if they can just handle things that way. So I'm glad to hear that, and I guess when it comes down to the budget request, some of that will be reflected in there as far as what you think you can put off through that instead of through the call center stuff. Another question about the how would the ACD and the IVR be affected when the POTS when the plain old telephones are phased out, which I know we're happily on the way to do that. But will we still be able to pursue these? Will that work with the more mobile system?
Yeah, I will have to double check with the IVR. Certainly the VCC is actually built on the new system. So it shouldn't have any impact at all. I'll double check with the old ACD system. And then just to reference again to the MyLA 311 app, so of the 1.5 million requests we get in through 311, about a third of them are through the app. So we've already actually using this year's funding with phase 2 to build out what was already planned for animal services. So that will be coming through. We're not quite sure exactly how many people will use it, but we'll just estimate that it's probably going to eventually be about the same amount, where about a third of those spill over into the mobile app.
Now, the CAO was asked to provide a written report also. Is there anyone here from the CAO's office to comment on this?
Hi there. Megan Cottier with the CAO's office. Yes, we did read in the motion that you asked for a report back on staffing. However, given the issues with the technology, our office made a recommendation to wait and see how the technology component plays out. And then we can look at what staffing makes sense based on the technology chosen. Where it wouldn't be helpful to put people in shelters answering bodies if the phone lines wouldn't allow them to answer. So we thought we'd let ITA and Animal Services do some preliminary work, and then we're committed to working with you to resolve the issue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, there are a number of other questions I could ask, but I think they probably aren't as relevant as they could be. I think what I'd suggest we ask for is a combination of ITGA, the CAO, and Animal Services to report back with a more detailed plan on how this is going to be proposed. And I don't know what an appropriate timeline would be. 30 days, 60 days, how long will it take you to do that?
Well, based on, we certainly should have a plan together in short order, because the budget is going to be due in November. So, and we're already working on those aspects. So, 30 days certainly seems, by that time, we will be finished with our budget request. So we'll be able to tell you what we've done.
So I guess I'd ask that you come back to either PA or a joint committee meeting, whichever you would prefer, in 30 days with that information. I know we have one speaker, Wayne Spindler, but I don't see him in the room. So presumably public comment is closed, and that would be my recommendation.
So I'd like to go ahead and second that motion, and I think, seeing no objection, that'll be approved, and we'll note and file the ITA report.
Perfect. Thank you.
John White, City Clerk, did you want to keep this in committee until the report comes in?
Yes.
Continue it for 30 days? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And we'll go ahead and go to item number 2.
Item 2, Personnel Department report relative to the resources required to develop a pilot program and implementation plan for civil service examination computer-based testing for the hiring of new employees by the City of LA. Pursuant to motion, Rodriguez-Coretz.
Good afternoon. Tina Rodriguez, Personnel Department.
Good afternoon, Steve Rivera, Personnel Department.
I'll just go over some highlights about the report. The Personnel Department was asked to report back on implementing a pilot program for computer-based testing in order to test and hire candidates for city employment. We're very excited that this came up because we are very committed, the Personnel Department, in innovative ideas and solutions to address the hiring needs of the city departments. The report in front of you covers some of the things we've done over the years related to computer-based testing. For instance, computer-based testing has been administered at our Personnel Department Testing Center for some time, mainly for essay-type questions, which we plan to expand in the near future. With additional funding in 2015, we were able to expand computer-based testing for certain exams across the country at different test centers using a contractor. Then we started researching online testing as a result of our involvement in Google Labs last summer. The new testing model of anytime, anywhere testing grew out from that, which we got funding for, $70,000 for this current fiscal year, which we are currently piloting. So anytime, anywhere testing basically is, instead of testing at a test center, we're able to test candidates in a place and a time of their own choosing. The test is remotely proctored, meaning proctoring the test is done online by webcam. We get exam requests on a continual basis from city departments for this pilot. We look for exams that have a multiple test component, the size of the candidate pool, their access and familiarity with computers, and any past exam issues. Our goal is to test 1,000 candidates this year. We've piloted 2 exams so far, and we plan to do 3 more this year. We're gathering feedback from candidates. And so far, about 80% of them is favorable to this process and would prefer doing it this way in the future. We're going to also gather feedback from departments, excuse me, once they start using the eligible list to see, what their thoughts on it. We recently secured an enhancement called Test Genius that is fully integrated with our current candidate processing system. Test Genius will serve as the platform for us to load online tests. And we'll do double duty because it'll also serve as our new test management system, which replaces our outdated system that holds basically our test questions. This way, we won't need to go through a contractor anymore to have the platform for online testing. We can do it ourselves. For remote proctoring, we've initiated the RFQ process and have received 6 respondents so far, so it looks very promising. About 46% of our exams consist of multiple choice test components. As a result, we will be requesting expansion of this program to test over 16,000 candidates in this way in the next budget year. Our goal, Our goal is to be the employer of choice, attract a diverse pool of best qualified candidates, have a broader reach of candidates because we're testing across the nation, and be innovative in our approach and use new technology available to us. So as funding is limited due to cuts in our budget, we're looking forward to your support in continuing our efforts for computer-based testing and online testing. We'll take any questions you might have.
Yes. I will start. So my question is on the expansion of the anytime, anywhere testing. How has that affected the timing of the hiring process for those departments that are chronically looking for the list to be updated on a more frequent basis, given the amount of hiring that we have to do in such an expeditious manner.
I can touch on that a little bit. Again, Steve Rivera with the Personnel Department. In terms of the computer-based testing in anywhere, anytime, the one thing right now that we have to do with our traditional testing is secure location and facility. That being said, when we test so many candidates, they're not always available. So that plays a role into how quickly we can test people or candidates. By doing online testing, that issue is essentially resolved. We don't have to be concerned about that. So that...
I'm sorry, about securing the location.
Correct. So now the candidate not only can take the exam when he or she wants to, but also from the location that he or she wants to as well. In addition to that, with the procedures of exams where there's vacancies, several vacancies, or critical vacancies due to turnover, we can have those exams open continuously, accept applications, and essentially shortly after they can test and get placed on the list that much faster. I don't have a specific timetable, but just looking at the process as a whole, you can imagine that it would be faster, especially for those that we know they're critical for the various departments in the city.
One of the complaints that I always hear from some of our departments, and having been on the Board of Public Works, it was something that we had tried to address. We had several conversations about it, but we have several positions that were always unable to get filled on a timely basis, and we always have conversations about the expirations of the list and what factor that plays in our ability to help assure that we're helping to accelerate the hiring process. It's something that we're always faced with, and never being able to completely fulfill our larger goals in achieving some of the numbers that we have to do on, maintaining our roads, hiring the engineers that we need, you name it. So I just want to get a better sense of, my bigger concern in having this conversation is twofold. My goal is to help assure that we have the kind of equity in hiring. I know we have the targeted hire, which is great, but also making sure that these opportunities are made available citywide and are much more accessible, either through our public library system, is something that I felt like every neighborhood has available to them. In terms of promoting the accessibility of that through these online testing centers, I think would be really worthwhile, but more importantly is to overall just accelerate the process so that we can help assure that we are not kind of limiting ourselves, because I just want to make sure that these lists, so of the positions that you mentioned or of the pilot where this was first launched, is it addressing those positions that are chronically facing the expiration of the lists?
I would say at this point those exams were selected for a couple of reasons. One is they included a multiple choice test component, which is where we plan on using this. Because keep in mind, we still do interviews, performance tests, physical ability tests for the different job classifications. Those would not be affected by that because we still have to assess those in the manner in which we currently do. But for those multiple choice test questions, these two exams were available. We wanted to do this ASAP because we want to speed this along. Like Tina had mentioned, we do have chemists, systems analysts, programmer analysts coming up. Those are IT job classifications that I would say are critical throughout the entire city. We're going to be giving 2 of those in the continuous spaces so that we can take applications and test them a little bit quicker. We're trying to balance the act between both customers, right? We have the city departments who are obviously critical customers of ours. We want to establish a list quickly for them, and then our candidates as well, and increase their experience in a positive manner. So we want to be mindful of the fact that if you are taking the test with the City of Los Angeles, there is a good chance that if you do well, there's a job for you. That balance is meaning that for some vacancies where there's one every couple of years, this model may not fit for them, but that's still what we're trying to assess. But as we pilot these next upcoming examinations, we feel confident that we're going to have a better time frame for you to say, this is, I think, how much we can cut from this timetable. This is how much we were able to increase the quality of our candidates, because we're going to be able to test people not just locally, but outside. So the departments who are saying, you know what, some of these really good candidates are located outside of California, this increases our ability to reach them as well, because they don't have to physically come down to not just Southern California, but downtown LA to test.
Well, and it presents us with a unique opportunity to be able to even test, on college campuses or, help make those opportunities available for some of the students that are recent graduates.
Yeah, we were actually looking at partnering with Cal State LA. They have test centers also, so we're in conversation with them on that. I just want to mention that, so that we're working in partnership with a lot of the departments to find out what their needs are. We've also put up exam information database on our website so that departments can look at where we are with any exam, any eligible list that's due to expire, so that they can, because simply sometimes it just takes time for us to process an exam. So for them to be able to look at it and say, okay, something is going to expire soon, let's ask for an exam request. So we have that available for the departments as well. And we'll make sure they're aware of it. All their HR departments are aware. Because simply when we do an exam, there is simply certain time, there is time eaten up for, scheduling candidates or, if they have a review period, sometimes several review periods, and we are required, by our own rules to allow for that because, we have to consider the candidates, what they want to review and what they want to maybe file a protest on. So there's simply some time involved in that. So that's why we have the other part of it where we work with the departments to kind of understand what their hiring plans are.
My colleagues, did you have any questions? Or Mr. Okay.
Does Bob want to go first this time? Either way.
Okay.
Well, you have another committee to go to.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So go for it.
I'll be brief. This is great. Excited about this. I know we talked a lot about this in the Innovation Fund last year and got funding for some of this stuff, and you mentioned that's part of how this went. I'm curious, so far, have we found the caliber of the candidates any different with the anytime, anywhere versus the traditional? Is there a discernible difference?
So we've just started in June. We haven't gotten feedback yet, but we will certainly, share that. We will be surveying the city departments that use these eligible lists as a result of this. So we will hear from them soon on what their experience is in terms of the quality of the candidates.
But there's no early difference or anything like that?
No, the lists were just established not too long ago, so I would say it's still a little early, but I think in the next few months, assuming that the departments fill their vacancies with these candidates, that we'll be able to get a good assessment of it. Sample size won't be that big because there was only 2 exams, but moving forward, I think it'll
And are the Google people still involved at all? They were just part of the lab originally, talking about the different streamlining methods, but they're out of it now, based on the lab, right?
Yeah, they're out of it. But we're still in conversation with ITA and the mayor's office to talk about, exams, how we are doing, and where we want to go from here, what goals we have.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Sure. I want to commend our chairs for your leadership on this motion. And the motion states, this is very sobering. Over half of the city's current workforce will be eligible to retire within the next year.
Yeah.
Now, since I was a brand new council member 4 years ago, we've known that there was going to be a real exodus, a mass exodus in city employees in the subsequent few years, and here we are. Now, this isn't to say that half of our workforce is in fact going to retire next year, but this is something that we really need to be on top of. So I think it's terrific that you're going to test at our colleges, Cal State LA, and hopefully it'll involve LACC and just all of our local educational institutions, and get the word out. The city will be hiring very aggressively in the next 5-10 years, and that a career with the city of Los Angeles is a good career to have. With that, questions. So is there a cost per candidate using the traditional model and a cost per candidate utilizing the new remote testing model?
We did some rough estimates before. Unfortunately, the online testing is more expensive for now. It may go down as, we look at our bids. But basically, what we can see is $85 a candidate versus about $28 per candidate for the traditional way. And this, the traditional way would include, costs with proctors, costs with facilities, costs with the test materials.
Right. but the cost benefit might be worth it, especially if
Exactly,
we
right.
go into the system and
Actually, mentioned a good point because the show rate has been better with our online testing. So instead of like a 50% show rate, we're showing like perhaps an 80% or so show rate.
a larger candidate pool because of the
They're
easier
really
access.
serious and they're easy access, right?
Are there innovation fund dollars to help with this, or?
It's just the
Grant?
$70,000 we got in our last budget for this current fiscal year. We did try to submit an innovation fund, but
I think because the project was already ongoing, it's no longer technically innovative, I guess.
Oh,
So
okay.
we didn't
What,
go through that.
why don't you suspend it and then reinvigorate
Yes.
it and then
Oh,
apply
we
for
can
the innovation
we can
fund?
rename it. I think, and maybe that'll help.
5 minutes and then rename it and apply again.
But I would like to say though that the last 2 fiscal years we did have in the budget close to $600,000 to spend on some of these innovative ideas that did get removed for this fiscal year. So we really just have the $70,000 to kind of move forward. So that is obviously forcing us to just do what we can with the $70,000. And although we'd like to expand on it, that's going to play a role in how much we can actually expand, because the exams that we currently have done and will be doing will be coming out of that fund.
Okay, and there's an RFQ currently out?
It's actually, all the submissions were due on Friday. This past Friday, we got 6 total submissions. Actually, 6 total submissions. We'll be reviewing those and looking at that. And that's why, like Tina had mentioned, the rough estimate was $85 a candidate. We're hoping that with the new RFQs and different features that cost will go down. We just don't know what. And then obviously the quality of the candidates, the candidate experience. And I think it's important to note that I think we are the only public agency, at least of our size, that is really doing anything like this. Some public agencies will tell you that they're doing online testing, but what they're really doing is screening candidates through some basic questions and then saying if they meet the requirements. We do that already. We've been doing that for several years. So when we get applicants who answer certain questions, we're able to determine not just who meets the requirements, but in some cases who are the better qualified candidates. This is taking it to another level of truly assessing candidates on the critical competencies, placing them on the list. And through the various steps that we do, we feel confident in telling the departments that the people who made it on this list truly meet the requirements and should be ready to do the job day one.
Great. And lastly, so you have the submissions, there are 6, and you'll do the evaluation. When will you have the results of that? How soon?
Off the top of my head, I don't know, but I know we were pretty aggressive in the timeline. So definitely before the end of the year is when we're looking at saying these are the top 2 or the top 3. And what we can do is, if with funding being available, we can go with one or multiple vendors to provide these services.
Terrific. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, I see Ted Ross back there, and I just wanted to invite Ted to come up for a minute, because I really would like just to kind of get a sense of what the technology is available out there and what opportunities there might perhaps be looking ahead for us for certain cost savings in implementing this on a more widespread basis.
Absolutely. There's a famous quote that Henry Ford was asked where he basically said, if you had asked me how to improve transportation at the time, we would have tried to invent a faster horse. Technology not only improves today, but it also transforms today. And when we really look at it, we are conducting our traditional civil service hiring process is very much the same way it's been in some ways for decades. There's nuances and there's adjustments. And technology holds an opportunity to completely transform it. When we think about what the civil service examination is, it's an opportunity to hire somebody and to identify, I wouldn't even say hire, it's to place them on the list and score them appropriately. So that when a department has a vacancy, they can then go through an interview process, et cetera, and hire on it. We feel very strongly in regards to civil service and the civil service rules. But if we can modernize that, if we can make that civil service exam process less painful, if we can make it available at any time and you can take it from anywhere, then we can dramatically reduce the barrier of entry and more candidates, a more diverse candidate pool, and we could get better quality up there at the top so that when a department search, they pull them in. I think you raise a very good point in regards to the cost. We're doing, as a city, and personnel's providing great leadership here, we are approaching it where we have online testing, computer-based, and working at continuous, but we know we have to drive down those proctoring costs. So there could be a whole set of items that we're working through, but this whole item is still very new for the city. So, there's always nervousness with, just much like the automobile and the horse and buggy, there's a lot of nervousness as to what this new upstart, smelly car is doing on the city streets. And here we are, 100 years later, taking it even to the next level. But really, when we look at it, there are ways in which we may be able to have a traditional test center so that we have a staff member. So this reduces the anywhere, but it allows a lot more throughput, and you would eliminate the proctoring cost. So you wouldn't require the online web proctoring. So maybe for out of state, they're allowed web proctoring, which has a more expensive fee. But if it's done in person, you may be able to have multiple test centers and simply run them through. The ability to take the test at any time is very valuable. So we don't necessarily have to, as you were mentioning before in Public Works, create a list that needs to last 2 years, in which in the beginning everyone hires the very best off that list, and as time progresses people start to say, not so interested in those candidates. Our ability to be able to make this as close to the time of hire as possible, to be able to provide, in our Google Innovation Lab, I was reminded of just how this impacts recruitment. If I'm at a college, and I see this young man right here, and that could be a great programmer for ITA. That's right. In our conversation, you could be a great programmer for ITA. If I'm telling you that in a year and a half you're going to need to take a test, I've lost you, right? Yeah. My ability to connect you immediately with your ability to get placed on a civil service list is how I can recruit and retain you, instead of me throwing something, down into the future. So our ability to have a technology solution that truly tests your abilities and ranks you appropriately so that when it's time to assert the list, we use 3 whole scores and facilitate it. I think we can dramatically reduce cost, and I think we can also dramatically improve the user experience. And to the councilman's point, we're in a world in which over half of 48,000 city employees are eligible for retirement. We absolutely have to transform the way that this process is being done.
And I want to mention that we have really little bumps in online testing so far. The candidate pool, think about the new generation, right? They're on their iPhones, and computer is like nothing. So it was not a problem to transition to that at all, for them to be tested online and to be remotely proctored. So I just want to mention that. And the 2 exams that we did already were in electrical engineering drafting tech and plumbing inspector. So those were not IT, but they were familiar with computers, and this is the generation we're dealing with.
And I applaud personnel, because much like the car and the horse and buggy, it's a complete change in their world. It's a complete change in their process. And so I think there's a lot of benefits, a lot of positive, but it requires different skill sets. When you move to an online test approach, you need to make sure your test questions are good test questions and they're evaluating it well. You need to review and iterate with time. You can't have bad questions that are creating bad pools. You should make sure that you have the right balance. If it's an IT test, it's not just technical proficiency, it's communication skills. So it's approaching it kind of like the SAT. It's changing and reiterating so that you're always building a better and better exam that accomplishes more of what you need to do. But that's a different set of skills than what even they have today. So it's tremendous upside and tremendous opportunity, and we really appreciate personnel department really stepping in there and being at the forefront.
And I'm glad you mentioned the SAT, because there are opportunities. There's a lot of campuses that proctor already. So there's an opportunity for us to even look at sharing those costs to make this more accessible to a lot of the students, because they're engaged in the same conversations, and they want to make sure that these opportunities are available to their students as well. But I'm sorry, Mr. Kratz, you had a question.
Yeah, just a couple of questions. I know obviously we want to find a way to reduce the impact on the general fund, but what about special funded departments? Can they use these, and can we use special funds to cover that?
I think it's a Steve question. Let me vacate this.
Because that could be an opportunity without putting a dent in our general fund to help be more nimble and get more people hired more timely.
So we do look, like I mentioned, at the specific exams and looking at the different job classifications. There are certain departments that would obviously benefit greatly from this approach to testing. I think DWP obviously comes to mind. We do a lot of testing for them, and a lot of them would actually fit very well for this model. LAWA has a few as well. It's something that we would definitely like to look at in addition to, like you mentioned, the universities and the colleges nearby. So I think it's something great that we can look for and discuss with them, because in the short communications that we've had with some of them about this approach, excitement, I would say, is the key word. In addition to the excitement, it's then the efficiency question. And once we have those figures, I think that's something that we can definitely tackle.
And obviously, the more of these we do, the more nimble we'll become. But if we can start with some of the general funds, so it has funded departments, so it has less of an impact on us, that certainly would be a positive.
Yeah, we'll certainly look into the special funds of the other departments.
And is there any doubt about the ability to screen out candidates that are subbing in their friends to take exams? Are we 100% certain that we can do this in a protected manner?
So that's why we are doing an RFQ for remote proctoring, so that the candidates are either videotaped on, and then the videotape also incorporates what they're seeing on their desktop. So it shows, their screen and the room. They're instructed to, pan the room or identify themselves. Their identification, the state ID. There's also the live proctoring, where on the other end is a person actually watching the different people, like maybe 1 to 10 candidates, one proctor to 10 candidates, where they see all the candidates and they're giving them instructions. And you can, again, see what's on their screen. They've been, being told about confidentiality. They're basically verifying their identification, that there's nobody in the room. And I think Steve should tell the story about one of the incidences.
Like Tina had mentioned, the feedback has been really positive, especially from the user-friendliness of it. But in terms of what Tina was discussing is the candidates are required to show an ID, obviously scan the room. Depending on the program that they're supposed to download, their computers can essentially lock and they can just take the test and can't open any more tabs or any other screens. But we did have a funny incident, and some of my staff is here that have seen those videos, where a young lady was taking the examination, and halfway into it, mom walks in passing the vacuum into her bedroom. And, the candidate is just, please get out, mom, because the instructions are clear. There should be no one else in the room, and so forth and so on. And so as you see this young lady, kicking the mom out, essentially she's passing the vacuum, those are the things that, as funny as it sounds, that's, I think, what mentions, right, it's caught, and you can see that. And I think, not to say this word lightly, but I think that's the cool part about this process, is that here you have someone at home who's taking this test at the time that she felt was best for her, didn't know mom was going to come in with a vacuum, right?
Just needs to plan out the cleaning schedule.
Exactly.
Right.
And those are things that we can take a look at and say, even though that wasn't part of the instructions, we know that there was no cheating going on.
Make daughter vacuum her own room.
Yes. That's what we learned from that.
Go online and take a test. She can vacuum her own room.
Yes. It's a good point. Yeah.
Right?
But just to your point, I hope that answers your question about, if we check people, if they are who they are, and about cheating.
Sounds as likely to succeed as other testing methods where live people do sometimes sneak through, so might even be better. So, it all sounds good. This sounds like the testing model for the future. It may not work in every particular test, as you said, but for the ones that do, I suspect the price will come down, and this will be the way we do things 10 years from now.
Yes, that's it.
So, very exciting.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing this forward.
No, again, and thank you for everybody for your work on this. Again, having served on Public Works, and as we were incrementally bringing on new staff online to help address some of the massive cuts that were endured during the economic downturn, we had to find ways of help bringing in more of the talent that we need to help assure that the city operates and functions, particularly given that we have this retirement cliff that we're all staring at. I know many general managers are concerned about it, and we just have to look at all the technology that is available to us to help accelerate that process. So I'm excited to see the progress and the conversation. I'd like to recommend that we go ahead and receive and file the motion and approve the Personnel Department's recommendation that the City Council support the Personnel Department's effort towards a computer-based online testing so that we can assure the most qualified candidates receive the city's current and future workforce needs. I'd like to have ITA report back in 30 days on additional technological tools that are available to help improve and or supplement the efforts that are currently underway in personnel. Okay.
And I guess from our committee, this will be a recommendation of the chair since
Yes.
the rest of the committee is no longer present.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 3.
Yes, please.
Item 3, see a report relative to the fiscal year 2017-18 program management and staffing plan for the Parker Center demolition project, a phase of the Los Angeles Street Civic Building project.
Hi, good afternoon, council members. My name is Jacqueline Wagner, and I'm with the CAO's office.
Hi, I'm Reza Bagarzadeh from Bureau of Engineering.
Okay, so in March 2017, the City Council certified the environmental impact report and approved the city's preferred alternative, B3, which is construction of a 753,000 square foot building to replace the Parker Center structure. At its June 29, 2017 meeting, the Municipal Facilities Committee considered a report from the Bureau of Engineering requesting various authorizations in order to proceed with this project. There are several recommendations in this report, the first of which designates the Bureau of Engineering as a program manager for the project. It's called the Los Angeles Street Civic Building Project, and authorizes 5 positions by resolution authority, 3 positions for the Bureau of Engineering, 1 position for the Bureau of Contract Administration, and 1 position for the Information Technology Agency. The report also authorizes the controller to transfer a total of $551,001 to cover salaries. It is recommended that the Bureau of Engineering absorb costs totaling $105,565 and report back through the FSR if the department is unable to absorb the expenses. It should be noted that $11 million has been authorized and approved for the demolition work through MICLA, of which this $551,000 will be covered. I think that's it. If there are any questions, we are here to answer them.
Thank you. Colleagues, any questions? Mr. Kretz.
Thank you. How does the request for staffing compare to staffing for other major city projects like Figueroa, Plaza, Rehabilitation, or Public Works Building Reconstruction?
Okay, so I am actually not able to answer that at this point, but I'll defer that to...
Police administration building had 13 staff when it started to do the design and construction for that project.
And so how do they all compare?
You know, there are phases to these projects. This project is starting with demolition and then design, construction. So right now we are starting with the demolition portion of the project, which is a small part of this big $600 million project. So the 3 staff that we asked for this phase, 1 principal engineer, 1 associate, civil engineering associate 3, and 1 senior management analyst 2. These are going to be used for designing for demolition and managing the construction, as well as doing pre-design and RFP, RFQ for the main building. That's why we are starting small with 3 staff at Bureau of Engineering, 1 inspector for inspecting the demolition phase of the project, which will start in spring of 2018. And we need the senior management analyst to do the RFP, RFQ for us.
Now, I noticed the senior management 2 can only be paid for 25% by MICLA funds. Is there any way that we could ask the department to staff that position, the 75% that can't be MICLA, through an existing position and existing resources?
At this point, I think the department needs a full-time position to do the work. It is the reason why only 25% of the duties are eligible for MICLA is because they're only 25% of the duties are technical in nature. We've had our bond counsel review the position descriptions. We do believe that it's the 75% of the work that is non-technical it's necessary. However, because of the timing of the request and it being in the early part of the fiscal year, we did not think it was appropriate to make an allocation at this time. We've asked the department to report back by the end of the fiscal year, and to the extent that they're unable to absorb it with savings, because there is a potential they may have salary savings, then we will revisit that, and we may make a transfer through the financial status report.
So for now, there isn't an assumption that it's paid for out of the general fund. It's possible that it could be paid for by salary savings and existing resources.
Absolutely, sir.
Very good.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When might the demolition begin?
Our design of the project is almost complete. We are starting bid and award in November. And we think sometimes in the spring we'll award it to the contractor. The package we prepared is a design-build package. So the contractor, when starts the project, it'll take him a couple of months to complete the design aspect of the project. So the actual hard work is sometimes in summer that they start demolition.
And the demolition process will be, first of all, removal of asbestos and whatever materials.
Exactly. First is removing all the contamination. At the same time, we'll be doing the ITA work because there are lots of ITA lines in the old building as well as in the jail and the 9/11 building. So we are going to construct a new dock bank all around Parker Center site, which we think that may take up to 6 months to finish. And then we'll run all the ITA cables. Once that's completed, the lower part of the demolition of the building will begin.
And once it's completely, that first phase is done, how will the building be deconstructed or will it be imploded?
No, the building has to be deconstructed because of, we checked with few demolition contractors. There are not sufficient space between Parker Center and the two adjacent buildings. Sure. Plus massive vibration and dust will prohibit doing the implosion.
And once it's completely removed, how long will construction of the new structure commence soon after?
Well, that phase we are working at the same time. We are going to issue a task order solicitation to our on-call pre-qualified consultant list. And as a result of that, we will prepare a performance spec and programming for the project. Once that, with the stacking plan and financial analysis is complete, we'll package a RFP, RFQ to all the interested entities. We think it might take several years before we finish the design and start construction.
So it'll be an empty lot for a while. Have you thought about a temporary use?
Well, we have thought about that. We have options in our bid as a add alternative. In case if it take a long time, we could pave the Parker Center site and utilize it as a parking space for the city. We have already thought about that part of it too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But those decisions haven't been made yet. Sorry, but those recommendations or decisions have not been presented before the MFC is yet.
That's why they're add alternatives. Okay. They're not part of the contract.
But just knowing this, it's not bad to think about. It sounds like it'll be a vacant lot for a little while, while the future design is fully funded and construction is approved, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not bad to think about a temporary use while it's an empty lot, because it sounds like it will be to me, even though nothing's been finalized there yet.
It's not final, it's just thought as options,
Thank you.
future options.
And just one more question. How focused are you in terms of choosing a contractor on their expertise and abilities in dealing with asbestos? Because with as large an asbestos-riddled building as this one, doing that right is, to me, the biggest factor in the whole demolition process. Obviously, even a little asbestos can be deadly, so.
We have done extensive study through our consultant for complete survey of all asbestos and lead material in the building. We have a full report. At the same time, we are doing destructive tests for concealed spaces to identify whether there are actually asbestos within the walls in the areas that we think there may be. So we've done a full report on that. And then on November 1st, which is next week, we are having a contractors outreach. We'll have about a couple of hundred people to attend so that we can let the community of contractors know this project is going and kind of link all the contractors and subcontractors together so we can get a most qualified contractors and subcontractors. At the same time, in our bid package, we're putting a pre-qualification for the contractor to make sure they have all the necessary expertise to remove contamination and demolition of this kind of building.
Great.
Okay, any additional questions? Before we take any action, we do have one speaker card with Mr. Spindler. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
For the record, as we know, we have observers here, Monica Rodriguez, fully Brown Act compliant, very good. So this plan, I've been through all phases of these. I went to all the plum meetings, Little Tokyo Association, the survivors, including the Tokyo Museum. They need to be a part of everything that happens here because this vote to take down Parker Center was to give that land back to the Asian American, the Japanese American community that land was stolen from to build that station. That station, Parker Center, is a lot of abuse of a lot of people, including my father and my uncle. My uncle was nearly beaten to death there in the 50s. So that place needs to go down. And what should be built is a park. Just like what Gloria Molina did, she built that park. You should build that park. And so that you have an open space between City Hall and Little Tokyo. That was the intent. Please do so. We really need that. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'd like to recommend that we approve the MFC's recommendation, and seeing no objection, that'll be the order.
And again, for the record, that would end my committee just as a recommendation of the chair.
Yes. And I believe the desk is clear.
Yes, ma'am.
Seeing that, we are adjourned. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
That was good.